The final fly that we're going to tie this evening is going to be a pattern that I can't live without either. And it's a pattern that I've been tying commercially for almost 30 years. And it's called the Beadhead Breadcrust. It was a fly that came from Pennsylvania. Ed Rolka popularized it here in the Rockies. And it's nothing more than a cased caddis imitation. It takes a little bit of time to master preparing the materials, but once the materials are prepared, it's a straightforward tie. I typically tie it on a Umpqua 5262, which is a 2X long hook in sizes 12 through 18. The predominant sizes, or the favorite sizes that I use, are going to be a 14 and a 16. I typically will put a 3mm bead on a 14, 2.5 millimeter on a 16, and a 2mm or 1.5 millimeter on an 18. The most important thing when you're dealing with beads is to make sure that you get the bead on straight from the beginning. So I'll take a little bit of extra time here and actually fill in that countersunk side of the bead. So it's going to take 50, 60, 70 wraps to actually make a little thread wedge right behind the bead. I want to make sure that that bead is on straight, because if it gets crooked, then you're going to be fighting that throughout the whole tying process. I'm going to take 2 strands of yarn. This is a traditional 4-strand yarn, and we're going to take 2 strands to form the underbody. We'll take those 2 strands, tie them in, and then we're just going to advance them back towards hook bend. And then as I move this yarn forward, I pack it just a little bit tighter with each wrap to try to develop a slight taper. I'm going to trim off the excess material there. Just secure that down. The body itself is tied from a stripped grouse quill. It's a red-faced stripped grouse quill where we've actually trimmed the barbules down to where they're about 1/16 of an inch from the actual quill itself. And then we split that quill in half with a razor blade and then clean the pith out of the inside of that quill. And what we have come away with is a big biot that's very, very flexible. And it allows tyers to create one of the most realistic cased caddis imitation that's ever been fished. We're going to tie this in tip first, right on the actual underbody, and then we'll advance the thread back to where the material goes down onto the actual hook itself. So the first wrap will be right on the hook bend, and then the consecutive wraps will be on the yarn itself. So now what we're going to do is palmer this forward, and you'll see as we move forward, you can see what those barbules do. They just flare out. And we'll trim that extra material off there. And the final step is to take a grizzly hen to tie in the collar. And this will simulate the legs on the caddis. And this is going to be tied in like a typical wet fly style. Then we're going to take 3 to 4 turns. And we'll sweep that hackle back with our thumb and our index finger and make a small collar. Typically use this as my lead fly. and my nymphing rigs, and then trail 2 bugs that would match the prevailing hatches once again. But you can see you get that real buggy look to it from that stripped quill. And you can come back if you got a couple fibers that need to be trimmed up, you can come back and just trim those off. But you can see you just get a real buggy looking cased caddis imitation. Again, popularized by Ed Rolka back in the early 70s. It's one of those flies that was great back then, and it's still as good as it was then today. So it's one of those flies that I think that every fisherman should carry in their box, whether they're a tailwater enthusiast or they enjoy fishing freestones. It's one of those patterns. It's very, very versatile, and everybody should carry in their box.